So in this segment, we're going to be talking about the pitiful 1% NHS pay rise. I know there are people complaining, saying that, oh, private sector's taking a big hit and all this unemployment and stuff. But, the private sector's been getting pay rises over the last decade. Nurses haven't. Public sector workers haven't, in general. Also, the fact that nurses and key workers have put it all on the line for NHS, for the country, and they should be rewarded. Specifically, people that have worked in the NHS and had to deal with rampant amounts of COVID with inadequate PPE for parts of the pandemic. Especially the fact that they haven't had an above inflation pay rise in a long time, and we'll be looking at nurse pay over the last decade as well. So this is just ridiculous. Um, this is just ridiculous here. So the government can expect a backlash if it goes ahead with a one proposed 1% pay rise for NHS staff in England next year, which is around for some NHS workers it'll be about £6 a week, and for others it'll be about £3.50 a week, depending on which bands they're in. And importantly, we've got to remember that that doesn't even cover parking. So you know NHS staff have been excluded from a pay freeze for most public sector workers. The NHS pay review body is to recommend salary levels for health service staff before early May, before ministers make their final decision. In its submission, the health department said awarding NHS staff a headline pay increase of more than 1% would require reprioritisation. Do it, fam. Do it, because we've seen MPs get a pay rise over the last 10 years, and MPs argue, oh, we're not in charge of our pay anymore. But, when the country was in recession, before the pay rules changed, when people were buying duck houses on expenses, you were still increasing your pay and doing stuff with expenses. So this argument that, oh, because it's in the hands of someone else, we have no control. Also, multiple MPs said they were going to donate the money from the pay rise. Let's see some receipts then, because we haven't seen it. We haven't seen it from a lot of them who said they would. So these arguments that they're making here, the money is there. They've wasted massive amounts on like test and trace and all this stuff. Um, Test and trace and all this stuff, when they could have, that money could have been spent on the NHS. They wasted billions of pounds giving it to Tory friends, buying worthless PPE that the NHS couldn't even use in the end. So this argument that there's no money for it is rubbish, to be honest. Even if you have to borrow the money, at least give them something, considering that all that they've given this year, and people making the arguments that, oh, they signed up for this. Like, they did not sign up for inadequate PPE. They did not sign up for staff shortages. All right, I don't want to hear it. Because you're full of nonsense. NHS pay in England has been out of the news since 2018, when a 3-year deal was agreed and welcomed by unions, but the issue is firmly back on the agenda with a new deal needed for the upcoming fiscal year. This is just the start of the process, not to mention that the NHS has actually had its budget cut over the next year. So if you look here, the budget for NHS England was £147 billion. Now for next year, it's going to be £139 billion. So the NHS has even had its budget cut by this government when they argue there's no money. Yes, you can borrow the money. Yes, it adds to the debt, but if you spend the money properly, it's an investment. You're investing in healthcare workers to keep them. So if we move on to the next article here, we can see there's outrage over this. You can see that Boris Johnson arguing this is all we can give peasants. Prime Minister's defended plans to give some NHS staff a pay rise amid warnings that undervalued nurses could quit. And how much is it going to cost to replace these nurses? You're talking about experienced nurses who have seen things, who can spot signs much quicker than a new fully trained nurse could. So, how much is that going to cost you? At least think about this with your brain, Bojo the Wonder Clown and Dishy Rishi. Like, this is ridiculous. We go to our next piece. Oh, sorry, this is the same. This is that one. Undervalued nurses may quit over the 1% rise, say the unions. So large numbers of staff could leave nursing when the pandemic is over. We already know that nurses from a 20-person team are short about 4 nurses, and those positions can't be filled anyways. How are you going to convince people to go into nursing? What's your sales pitch going to be? All right, you could be a nurse when you're older. It's like, all right, so we can have pay freezes and not get adequate pay rises, to be stuck in situations where we don't have adequate PPE during a pandemic, to be clapped but not given a pay rise when we fully deserve and need one, to be understaffed constantly. That's a great sales pitch, guys. Great sales pitch. So Patricia Marquise from the Royal College of Nursing told Times Radio it made staff in England feel that they were not valued and would worsen the NHS recruitment issues. The body representing NHS trusts has joined unions to criticise the offer, but the government has defended its proposal, saying public finances were under unprecedented strain. The question I'd ask you is, if after all that the key workers and specifically NHS staff have given, if now is not the time for a pay rise, when is it going to be? Because we saw under Theresa May's government, that they said austerity was over and we didn't see a massive pay rise for NHS staff. So when is the time going to be for NHS staff to get a pay rise? That's the question I ask. Because they ain't going to get one. It's going to be in 3 years' time, the government will be like, oh, we're still struggling from the coronavirus pandemic and all this stuff. And, in 10 years' time, there'll probably be another recession from some stupid thing again. We seem to have one every 10, 15 years. So it's just ridiculous. So the lowest paid minimum full-time salary for newly employed drivers, housekeeping assistants, nursery assistants and domestic support workers is 18k. The starting salary for most newly qualified nurses is around 25,000. Staff in high-cost areas such as London get extra payments, but they've got to pay things like, ridiculously high, parking fees and stuff like that. So yeah, they fully deserve one. Morale is low among an exhausted workforce. The NHS pay row in England, fueled by angry responses for health unions, rumbles on and seems unlikely to fade away. It is significant that the employers now have entered the fray in the shape of NHS providers, the group representing trusts in England. The way the NHS is set up is very weird. NHS trust leaders know only too well that morale is low among an exhausted workforce. People that have been putting it on the line for well over a year. During this pandemic, and even before that, we saw a massive winter crisis year on year on year under the Tory government, year on year. So you've got staff that have been burnt out for a long time. Ministers argue that the pandemic changed everything, including the state of public finances, and that earlier plans had to be rethought. They said that compared to other parts of the public workforce facing a pay freeze, the NHS would fare better, and that difficult measures were needed to respond to public borrowing increases. But after unprecedented pressures on hospitals during the pandemic, there is growing sympathy for health workers. There will be a difficult few months ahead for the pay review body. As the pay review body considers the arguments and ministers decide their next steps. And so what we can see from this is the NHS staff feel undervalued, underpaid and overworked. And, that's a recipe for disaster here. Because, some of these people haven't been able to see their family for a long time. Because they've had to live away. Because they don't want to give them COVID. Because the chances are that at work they could catch it. These people are some of the best among us. And they are not being valued properly by the government. I've seen people tweet out stories about how Canadian, workers have, Canadian doctors have cancelled their pay rise. This was from 2018. I couldn't actually find any up-to-date stories about it. But I have seen, Canadian health workers having their salaries increased due to COVID. So I don't understand, there's some Twitter feed called Labour is Toast or something like that, and they've got Preeti Patel on the cover of it. I did notice that they didn't actually cite an article. No surprises here when this is, this article's 2 years old and it's about something else entirely, the Canadian healthcare system. So that's a load of rubbish. So even Canada have increased, the amount healthcare workers are paid. I don't know if it's enough, but they also did some sort of UBI as well. Where Canadians can get money from the government. So, Canada have dealt with this way better than we have. So we've just covered this one. This is a great, thing. Photoshop edit, I think. Look her in the eyes and tell her she's only worth £3.50 a week pay rise. Protect the NHS from Tory scum. I would leave out the insult, but, it's true. Nurses also complain about, fundamentally flawed PPE rules. So nurse leaders are lobbying the government to update fundamentally flawed guidance on personal protective equipment. The Royal College of Nursing says existing recommendations are based on out-of-date evidence. So this is about giving them better quality, things like masks when they go in to help people. So the nurse who wishes to remain anonymous wants to use what's known as an FFP3 mask that filters out infectious aerosols, but she says her employers insisted on following national guidance that health staff should wear thinner surgical masks instead, which aren't as safe. The FFP3 masks are a lot safer. This comes at a time of mounting concern among many healthcare organisations that personal protective equipment is inadequate. A new report for the Royal College of Nursing criticises the official guidelines for PPE as fundamentally flawed because they're based on out-of-date evidence. It says that the risk of infection by aerosols is not given enough emphasis, and that key research papers highlighting the possibility of airborne transmission has not been considered. So, nurses are even arguing they're not getting adequate PPE because of the outdated rules. which seems to be the case, to be honest, because surgical masks are good, but the FFP3 masks are better. We're seeing strikes in America over as conditions and salary. This is in Worcester, but it's in Massachusetts. It's very confusing, I know. Hundreds of nurses at St. Vincent Hospital in Worcester, Massachusetts, went on strike on Monday, protesting what they call dangerous conditions amid the coronavirus pandemic. The strike comes after negotiations between Massachusetts Nurse Association and Dallas-based Tenet Healthcare, which owns the hospital, broke down. About 800 nurses planned on striking from 6 a.m. on Monday, according to a statement from the MNA, and they plan to picket from every day from 6 a.m. until midnight until the issue is settled. The thing is, nurses in this country can't actually protest en masse because of the COVID rules, which makes sense. Someone got fined £10,000 for it. So if we actually look at nurse salary for so this is for lower, this is for band 5. Which is for newly trained nurses. You can see here, so 2010, 2011 started off at 25,000. This is real terms pay, so this takes into account inflation. And so if we actually look at it in terms of real terms, they had massive pay cuts, and that's only just leveling out now. It's only just leveling out now, and even with the government's 1% pay rise, I don't know if it'll actually be more pay than they actually received in the at the start of 2010, sort of. Labour, the coalition government transitioning from the Labour government. And if you look at the average basic pay, you can see that that's gone down massively. That's not going to go up in terms of real terms pay anytime soon. So it's just ridiculous, to be honest. I don't blame them for going on strike. Obviously it's going to have massive implications for people that need care. That is going to happen. But at the same time, if these nurses cannot get a pay rise now, if these NHS workers can't get a pay rise now, they'll never get it. They'll never get a proper above inflation pay rise, which they've deserved over the last 10 years. And the simple reality is, if we don't back them, if Labour don't back them, then this Labour Party is a full-on failure, because they deserve a lot more than they've been given over the last 10 years. And my advice to people, use it or lose it, fam. Support them now, or we risk losing the NHS properly, not just through privatisation, but through staff shortages. And that means the government the NHS is going to crumble further and have more pressure put on it. It's going to go into a negative spiral where you have staff shortages, and then people get burnt out and they realise they don't want to do this anymore because there's not enough staff. And that keeps happening, and you don't recruit enough new staff, you're going into a downward spiral. That's what's going to happen. Not to mention the fact that the government are going to keep stealth privatising it as well. That's not going to help. But the government had money for giving contracts to their friends, buying inadequate PPE and all this stuff, but they don't have money for NHS workers. Have put it all on the line. It shows you what their priorities are. And back them. Labour Party, Lib Dems, you have to back them, because we've seen massive problems with the NHS since the coalition government, really. And if we don't help them now, we risk losing the NHS. We risk losing a lot of healthcare workers who save people, essentially, who play a large part in saving people. So it's ridiculous, to be honest, this whole situation. But I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.